Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Mess. So Terek and our continuing series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and it's the last Thursday of September, so you know what that means. It's time for the MiSTer News Roundup, and it has been a very busy month. Making Sega Saturn and Nintendo 64 update videos has felt kind of like a full-time job, but it has been absolutely fun. So without any further ado, let's get right into the news for the month. Obviously leading the charge is the absolutely epic progress the Nintendo 64 core is making on MiSTer. It has gone in months from looking like a complete mess, although an impressive mess, to having games fully running on it, to going into dithering mode where you can get all of these great details looking amazing on your screen. This was long thought to be the impossible core, but over the last couple of months we learned it should be possible, and in September it just absolutely exploded. Robert, or FPGAZumSpass, the core developer, has been updating this thing basically every day or every 2 days with new features, new working games, and a ton of stuff. And if you haven't seen any of my preview videos, there's a whole playlist of them. Go check them out, because seeing what has been happening on the current core for Nintendo 64 on MiSTer has been breathtaking to say the least. At the beginning of the month we had a decent amount of games that just worked, but now that list has definitely been added to, and there's games that you can sit down and play from start to finish and 100% beat. Things like Banjo-Kazooie, Donkey Kong 64, Super Mario 64, and Mario Kart are basically just the same experience if you were playing original hardware, outside of not having the blur effects and the anti-aliasing added in. Now the TLB, or virtual memory paging system, has not been implemented in the core yet. Maybe next month, maybe the month after that, but let's not rush it, because don't forget, Robert, the core developer, said he wanted to have one game working by Christmas. It's the end of September, and almost like 80% plus of the Nintendo 64 library plays on the current MiSTer core, and that is just wild. I can't wait to see what October brings. Every single update, something new gets added, something unique, and games like Mario Kart 64 are basically exactly as they should be as far as feature set and implementation are concerned. It's just missing some of the post-processing pipeline effects, which have nothing to do with the execution of the code on Mario Kart 64. Robert very early mentioned this being one of the first games he wanted to have buttoned up and finished, and you can sit down and play Mario Kart 64 today and have an absolutely spectacular experience. The last visual bug with these thwomps textures here was eliminated like 4 or 5 days ago, and now if you're playing the game, the only thing you're going to really notice is there is no real blur on it. But the Nintendo 64 was such a fun library, and I know a lot of people missed out on it back in the day. So many people had PlayStation 1s. Nintendo 64 definitely did not win this generation, so maybe this is the first time you're actually getting a chance to play the full library, or maybe this feels like the actual launch of the Nintendo 64 from back in the day because you weren't there and you now get to follow along with the progress. But to say Nintendo 64 core in September had a big month would be an understatement. This thing has absolutely exploded. It has gotten huge, and it's been so much fun to follow along with the progress. I just can't wait to see what October brings. Maybe we'll be playing Castlevania, but I'm not going to hold my breath. Now moving on to another console that had an epic month, the Sega Saturn. There were multiple core updates from SRG 320. Not only is that important because we see progress, but it's mostly important because we know he's checking in and he is good where he is. But there has been some friendly debate on the MiSTer Discord channels between Sega Saturn and Nintendo 64 fans, voting as to what they thought was a better console of the two. Leave me a comment down below and tell me what your choice is, but I will safely say, back in the day and even today, Sega Saturn 100% has my heart. That's not to say I don't love Nintendo 64, Saturn just has what I crave. And basically with this new core, a lot of it has been seemingly rewritten or re-implemented, and a lot of people that were having issues with older RAM modules seem to be having a lot more success getting games to boot and play. Now anyone out there that's using a 4-chip RAM module, apparently due to the interleaving of how the data is spread across those RAM chips, you're not going to have perfect compatibility with 4 RAM modules, or at least it seems. Now don't all go sell those modules, honestly they're probably not worth that much anyway, and switch to the 2-chip module just because I told you so. Wait a few weeks to see that information come in more, but it's seeming like a 2-chip system is going to be what you want moving forward. You can grab those from MiSTer add-ons if you're in the United States, and if you're not in the US, tell me what country you are. I can always recommend somebody that's selling in your region because I get customs can be expensive. But with this new core, so many more games are stable. Games that didn't used to work are now working, and games that were broken in previous releases have come back to life with better improvement. It seems like there was something in the core that just needed to be reworked for better compatibility, and now that that has happened, it's 100% playing and feeling a lot better. There's definitely still a few games that don't work, and there's definitely still some improvements to be made, but SRG 320 is clearly still working on it, and we are in absolutely no rush when it comes to him and his work. The fact that he's doing this still still is absolutely epically impressive. I can't believe it, but I'm always impressed and blown away by his progress. But if you didn't play Sega Saturn back in the day, there's a ton of fun to be had on this, and there are some games that you can just 100% complete on the Sega Saturn core as well. Things like Elevator Action Returns I have finished, games like Bubble Symphony I've also finished. And there's a very specific reason I'm mentioning a game like Bubble Symphony, and that's not just because it's my favorite game in the Bubble Bobble franchise. This runs on the Taito F3 arcade motherboard, of which I have one in the closet we'll probably show on camera eventually, but RCA Victor Co. is working on reverse engineering the display processor from this board, nicely donated by Furtech, and that means that he is working on an FPGA core for the Taito F3. There's an absolute metric butt ton of good games on this board. I absolutely love it, and it is one of the harder arcade boards to deal with. That is because it has a sync rate that basically nothing wants to accept. Of my 3 PVMs, only one of them sometimes will get a sync, and that's after I go into the service manual. But it's got games like Bubble Symphony or Riding Fight, a sprite scaling beat 'em up that takes place on a hoverboard. This board has such a fun library, and it's one that I've been really looking forward to hearing about on MiSTer at some point in time. So the idea that somebody is working on reverse engineering the chips with an FPGA core in mind down the line is absolutely exciting. This might not be Capcom CPS2 levels of an amazing library, but it gets really close, and I can't wait to see this happen. If you've never played the Taito F3 before, any of the games, you definitely should check them out. If you're wondering what an actual decap chip looks like, this is the scan of that chip. To me, it has the same imagery of a sweat-stained t-shirt, but if you look closely, you can see little lines, and that's all the logic and everything else that makes up a single chip, and trying to reverse engineer that, definitely not a small job. Now on to something that I've been absolutely waiting for, and I'm glad is finally happening. Jotego and his team are working on a Splatterhouse core for MiSTer FPGA. If you've never played Splatterhouse before, it is one of, in my opinion, the best arcade horror beat-em-ups ever made. He showed a screenshot. I'll show you the game. I do own this on the FM Towns Marty, and it's a very expensive copy, but honestly I've always wanted an arcade board for this, and that is even more expensive. If you want original Splatterhouse hardware, you're getting close to a mortgage payment these days depending on where you live. So the idea of getting this absolute classic Namco horror beat 'em up on MiSTer, 100% there for it. And apparently a lot of people have noticed I love to say 100% all the time. You're 100% correct. I love 100% of the time. But all jokes aside, Splatterhouse is just a classic. I don't know if this is going to be ready in October. That would be my presumption because it is a horror game. But stay tuned for more Splatterhouse updates, because the minute this core goes live, I am 100% going to do a review of it, because this is one of my favorite games of all time, and it's so much fun to see it coming to an FPGA near you. But tell me down below what your favorite game that currently isn't on MiSTer is, and that way I can just kind of chat with you guys about what you love, because I do love getting different comments, hearing about what it is you like and dislike, and knowing what you're looking forward to on MiSTer in the future. But Splatterhouse, 11 out of 10, 100% play it. But let's leave Namco realm and go over to Midway, because Pramod has been updating people on his Midway cores that are in progress. Now there seems to be a possibility that some of these will need a dual RAM setup. It's not 100% determined yet, it seems like in either direction, but what I'm going to do shortly is do a dual RAM build on camera for you guys so you understand what the hardware looks like, how it functions, how to set it up. That way you can decide if you want to do a dual RAM build or not. Because right now there's not a ton on MiSTer that really requires dual RAM whatsoever, but that might change in the future, so leave me a comment down below and tell me if you want to see that. Now onto the Mega Drive and Sega Genesis. Nuked Mega Drive is now going to be the default core apparently for your MiSTer when you update it. The old repository has basically been put on hold, and now you'll see here that this new core is basically taking its place. I'm going to do a video review on this shortly, talking about how it works, how it's based on real silicon scans of the Mega Drive and Sega Genesis chips internally. That way you can kind of get an updated guide, but that might take me a week or two. I've been really busy lately. But honestly, getting improvements to the Sega Genesis is always a welcome thing, because it's one of my favorite 2D consoles of all time. And if you've used it, tell me down below what you've thought so far, because I've basically spent maybe only 10 minutes with this thing just checking it out. But it's 100% here. It is a new core for MiSTer. Obviously it's just a new core for a system we already had, but it's always getting updated, and that's the great thing about MiSTer. It's not just make a core and move on to the next thing. The Sega Genesis and Mega Drive core has been on MiSTer for years now, but it has been updated, which means that there's always work being done in the background, there's always progress to be made, and who knows what the next update to a current core might be down the line in the future. But if you haven't updated your MiSTer yet, You should be updating it at least weekly in my opinion. Check out the Nuked Mega Drive FPGA core. It's really interesting, and I'll talk more in depth about how it was made in that video. But honestly, the big news for me this September is basically tied between Nintendo 64 and Sega Saturn. But honestly, seeing the level of progress that the Nintendo 64 has made in a month just blows my mind, and that's why you're just seeing a little bit more of it at the end of the video. It's amazing, check it out. But that is the news for September. It's been a fun month, it's been a busy month, and I can't wait to see what October brings. I'll probably have some horror MiSTer related content and definitely a lot of other horror related videos on the channel, but September was a banger. Let's move on to October. See you next time. Bye bye.